But today is a big day. We reported on Michael Cohen the other day being arrested and sentenced to 3 years. Today, just moments ago, this is the Washington Post, just moments ago we have breaking news on the Anticlimactic Non-Show, and there's no one here to hear it. This is by Spencer S. Shue and Tom Jackman in the Washington Post. Just moments ago, at 10:50 a.m., 15 minutes ago, a Russian gun rights activist pleaded guilty Thursday to conspiring with a Russian senior official to infiltrate the conservative movement in the United States as an agent for the Kremlin from 2000 until her arrest in July 2017. I'll repeat that because it's the first. A Russian gun rights activist pleaded guilty to conspiring with a senior Russian official to infiltrate the conservative movement in the United States as an agent for the Kremlin from 2015 until her arrest in July of 2017. So the end of the Obama administration through the entire election up until her arrest a summer ago, July of 2017. Maria Butina, aged 30, became the first Russian national convicted of seeking to influence U.S. policy in the run-up and through the 2016 election as a foreign agent, agreeing to cooperate in a plea deal with U.S. investigators in exchange for less prison time. This is what's happening to Trump now. They're all realizing they're busted. Butina admitted to working with an American political operative and under the direction of a former Russian senator and deputy governor of Russia's central bank to forge bonds with officials at the National Rifle Association, the NRA. Conservative leaders and 2016 U.S. presidential candidates, including Donald Trump, whose rise to the Oval Office she presciently predicted to her Russian contact. Guilty, Butina said with a light accent, in entering her plea with U.S. District Judge Tanya S. Chutkan at a hearing this morning in federal court in Washington. As part of her plea, Butina admitted seeking to establish and use unofficial lines of communication with Americans having influence over U.S. politics for the benefit of the Russian government through a person fitting the description of sanctioned Russian central banker Alexander Torshin, prosecutor Eric Kennerson said. The court did not set a sentencing date pending Butina's ongoing cooperation with prosecutors, but set another hearing for February 12th on the status of her case. Butina is expected to provide evidence against a Republican Party consultant with whom she had a romantic relationship and worked closely with after they met while he visited Moscow in 2013. The operative, previously named as Paul Erickson, is a longtime GOP political advisor from South Dakota who managed the 1992 presidential campaign of Pat Buchanan. In a statement Wednesday, that's yesterday, Erickson's lawyer, William Hurd, said, "Paul Erickson is a good American. He has never done anything to hurt our country and never would," close quote. So there it is. Breaking news. Russian Maria Butina pleads guilty in an effort to forge Kremlin bond with U.S. conservatives. Wow. All right. This leads us to the AP, which has a piece out not an hour ago by Jonathan Lemire and Eric Tucker. As protectors abandon Trump, investigation draws closer. This from New York. President Donald Trump has now been abandoned by two of his most powerful protectors, his longtime lawyer and the company that owns the National Enquirer tabloid, bringing a perilous investigation into his campaign a step closer to the Oval Office. Both Michael Cohen and American Media Incorporated now say they made hush money payments to a porn star and a Playboy playmate for the purposes of helping his 2016 White House bid, a campaign finance violation. Hush money to these women is a campaign finance violation. The women alleged affairs with Trump, and federal prosecutors say the payments were made at Trump's direction. The admissions by Cohen and AMI conflict with Trump's own evolving explanations. AP has come to calling them evolving explanations. Since the spring, Trump has gone from denying knowledge of any payments to saying they would have been private transactions that weren't illegal. So he denied it, worked his way down to, well, no, they were just private things, and not anyway, none of it's illegal. I'm the greatest. Sorry for my editorializing, but to summarize. On Twitter today, Trump contended he, quote, never directed his former personal lawyer to break the law, as if this guy ever let anybody do anything in his name without telling them to do it. He tweeted that Cohen, quote, was a lawyer and he is supposed to know the law, close quote. Cohen pleaded guilty to campaign finance charges, quote, in order to embarrass the president and get a much reduced prison sentence, close quote, Trump tweeted. He said the charges were, quote, unrelated to me, close quote. So Trump is in denial. Though prosecutors have implicated Trump in a crime, they haven't directly accused him of one, and it is not clear that they could bring charges against a sitting president, even if they want to, because of Justice Department protocol. Nonetheless, Trump's changing explanations have clouded the public understanding of what occurred and are running head-on into facts agreed to by prosecutors, AMI and Cohen, who pleaded guilty to campaign finance violations and other crimes and was sentenced yesterday. Quote, you now have a second defendant or group campaign, said Rick Hazen, an election law expert at the University of California in Irvine. Trump's first explanation of the payment that would eventually help lead Cohen to a 3-year prison sentence came at 35,000 feet over West Virginia. Returning to Washington on Air Force One, Trump on April 6, for the first time, answered questions about the reports of $130,000 in hush money paid to porn star Stormy Daniels, issuing a blanket denial to reporters while saying they would, quote, have to ask Michael Cohen, close quote. 3 days later, the FBI raided Cohen's office, seizing records on topics including the payments to Daniels. Furious, Trump called the raid a, quote, disgrace, and said the FBI, quote, broke into his lawyer's office. He also tweeted that attorney-client privilege is dead, close quote. That's how Trump observed it. Federal agents had been granted the right to seize the materials by warrant. The raid was overseen by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan and arose from a referral from Special Counsel Robert Mueller, who was investigating Russian election interference. At the time, Cohen said he took out a personal line of credit on his home to pay Daniels days before the 2016 election without Trump's knowledge. He took out a personal line of credit on his home, he said, to pay Stormy Daniels days before the election without Trump's knowledge. As if Trump would allow something like that to happen without his knowledge. I think that's the part that's so absurd. It's patently obvious that he's a slumlord used to corrupt behavior. And his lies are just every other word that comes out of his mouth is a lie. That's just to get to the thing that covers up the truth. And the stuff that covers up the truth is ad nauseum repetition of moronic praise for nonsense with no substantiation, statistics, or logic to it. The praise. Its sole goal is to maintain the illusion that he's doing a great job, the country's doing better than it ever has in history, and that nothing anybody's saying is true. It's all just lies of his enemies, right? And when we ask ourselves how we got here, I don't understand why more people are not saying they fixed the election. It's fixed. He's not even elected. I think part of the problem is admitting that means going back to Bush v. Gore and opening that up. Because I don't believe Bush was ever elected. I think he lost to Gore. I think he lost to Kerry. I covered the election of 2004, and I have strong evidence to the contrary. I tried to report it and was marginalized. So that was pointless. That methodology was pointless. The courts. So he began by saying, I don't know anything about that. It had nothing to do with me. If it happened because my lawyer did it. You'll have to talk to him. Later that month, in a freewheeling Fox and Friends interview, Trump acknowledged that Cohen represented him in the crazy Stormy Daniels deal. That's a quote. In May, Trump and his attorneys began saying Cohen received a monthly retainer from which he made payments for non-disclosure agreements like the one with Daniels. In a series of tweets, Trump said those agreements are, quote, very common among celebrities and people of wealth. And this was a private agreement, very common among celebrities and people of wealth. Why would you vote for him? All you poor white folk, middle-class white folk? Is your racism so deep that you would just shoot yourself in the foot? Pound your own leg with a knife? It's staggering. People familiar with the investigation say Cohen secretly recorded Trump discussing a potential payment for former Playboy playmate Karen McDougal 2 months before the election. On the tape, Cohen is heard saying that he needed to start a company, quote, for the transfer of all that info regarding our friend David, close quote, a possible reference to David Pecker, Trump's friend and president of AMI. When Cohen began to discuss financing, Trump interrupted him and asked, what financing? We'll have to pay, Cohen responded. These are quotes. Prosecutors announced Wednesday that AMI acknowledged making one of those payments in concert with the Trump campaign to protect him from a story that could have hurt his candidacy. The company avoided prosecution under a deal with prosecutors. So the National Enquirer pushed that thing to the last possible minute, and on the way out said, plea agreement, and skipped. And they'll do it again if they want to. Because millions of people, uneducated people, predominantly white uneducated people, read the National Enquirer like it is news and not straight propaganda from the mouths of manipulators. In August, Cohen pleaded guilty to campaign finance violations and other charges, saying he and Trump arranged the payment of hush money to Daniels and McDougal to influence the election. The next day, Trump argued that making the payments wasn't a crime and that the matter was a civil dispute, and then took a swipe at his former employee. Quote, if anyone is looking for a good lawyer, I would strongly suggest that you don't retain the services of Michael Cohen, close quote, he tweeted. Earlier this week, Trump compared his situation to one involving President Barack Obama's 2008 campaign. The Federal Election Commission, which typically handles smaller campaign finance violations where the actions aren't willful with civil penalties that are typically fines, docked the Obama campaign $375,000 for regulatory civil violations. The fines stemmed from the campaign's failure to report a batch of contributions totaling nearly $2 million, $1.9 million, on time in the final days of the campaign. So they failed to make a filing on time, and that's what Trump is comparing his hush money and the admission of a Russian who has pleaded guilty to conspiring with senior Russian officials to infiltrate the conservative movement in the U.S. as an agent for the Kremlin from 2015 until her arrest in 2017. You can see the picture. The revolution we have asked for so long is so overdue that it's transparent. How can it go on? But legal analysts said the accusations against Trump could amount to a felony because they revolve around an alleged conspiracy to conceal payments from campaign contribution reports and from voters, hence the difference between what he did and Obama. It's unclear what federal prosecutors in New York will decide to do if they conclude that there is evidence that Trump himself committed a crime. The Justice Department, in opinions issued by its Office of Legal Counsel, has said a sitting president cannot be indicted because a criminal case would interfere with the duties of the commander-in-chief. The Justice Department of the United States of America, in opinions issued by its Office of Legal Counsel, has said a sitting president cannot be indicted because a criminal case would interfere with the duties of the commander-in-chief. Prosecutors in the Southern District of New York and with Mueller's office would presumably be bound by that legal guidance unless the Justice Department were to nullify those opinions. Politically, Trump's shifting claims could harm his credibility with voters, but legally they may not make much of a difference. Quote, "It's not clear to me that he's made any false statements in legal documents that could open him to liability for perjury," close quote, Hazen said. For the payments themselves to be a crime rather than a civil infraction, prosecutors would need to show that Trump knew that what he was doing was wrong when he directed Cohen to pay the women, and that he did so with the goal of benefiting his campaign. That is just so obvious to anyone. Trump has not yet laid out a detailed defense, though he could conceivably argue that the payments were made not for the purposes of advancing his campaign, but rather to prevent sex stories from emerging that would be personally humiliating to him and harm his marriage. That argument was advanced by former Senator John Edwards, a North Carolina Democrat. You remember him? Beautiful mane of blonde hair, son of a mill owner, a lawyer who wanted tort reform. Senator John Edwards, a North Carolina Democrat, in a similar campaign finance case that went to trial. But that may be tougher for Trump than it was for Edwards, given the proximity of the president's payment to the election. It was done days before the election. Timing that, on its face, suggests a link between the money and his political ambitions. Listen to the language AP, the Associated Press, has to use because attorneys tell them they cannot say what is obvious to us. And on the Anticlimactic Non-Show, we can just say it, and it's just obvious, but you cannot write it and publish it in the New York Times or the AP or the Washington Post at the moment. You can put it in an op-ed a certain way, but the editors will go to the lawyers and the editors will sit with the writer of the op-ed, and they'll say, you can't cross that word out, you can't use that word, and they'll argue in a room for 10, 15, 20 minutes. I've seen this happen. I've been involved in rooms where that happened. And then the publisher has no interest in, failing his company. So, that's right. Shut up, writer. Strike that word out. Replace it with as. I've seen that kind of stuff happen. So, all of this is Trump playing the media so effectively. So effectively. And those who admire him for it, you can only be benefiting. Those who admire him for it, when he's screwing you over so badly and so ferociously, and that of the future of yourself and your children and their children, for you to just admire him as he does that, because you're ignorant of the facts, and you decided to blind yourself to a narrow vision being shoveled down your mouth with massive billions of dollars worth of shovel that's shoveling it into your mouth, is something you need to consider. The last graph from the APPs. Still, the cases aren't always easy, as proven by the 2012 trial of Edwards. Jurors acquitted Edwards on one charge of accepting illegal campaign contributions, but couldn't reach a verdict on the 5 remaining counts, including conspiracy and making false statements. Prosecutors elected not to retry Edwards, the Democratic vice presidential nominee in 2004, and a candidate for president in 2004 and 2008. So he just had sex with the woman on the campaign trail. Oh my God, it screwed up the election for Kerry and all the Democrats. But when we go to the legal side of it, we can't really prove that any of it. And he said, hey, I can't harm my family. Okay. And then he runs for president. Again. We have to make this country better, and the only way is if we make better effort to be better people. And this man is not a good person. We're going to check out the Maria Butina story, which has now landed on the New York Times. We gave it to you first. It was on the Washington Post first. Now it's in the New York Times. I'm going to hit you with that. And I think what we're going to do is, at the 30-minute mark, we're going to go ahead and kill the show today and restart a second show, part 2 show. Matthew Rosenberg, 6 minutes ago in the New York Times. To the conservative Americans she courted, Maria Butina was the right kind of Russian. She loved guns and the church and networking with top officials in the National Rifle Association. She smoozed with Republican presidential candidates and became a supporter of Donald J. Trump. She spent Thanksgiving at a congressman's country house, took a Trump campaign aide to see the rock band Styx, and helped a Rockefeller heir organize friendship dinners with influential Washingtonians. Today, Ms. Butina, 30, pleaded guilty to a single charge of conspiring to act as a foreign agent in a deal with federal prosecutors. In doing so, she acknowledged that her activities were motivated by more than mere personal conviction. As part of the deal, Ms. Butina admitted to being involved in an organized effort backed by Russian officials to open up unofficial lines of communication with influential Americans in the NRA and in the Republican Party, and to win them over to the idea of Russia as a friend, not a foe. Ms. Butina's guilty plea now casts a spotlight on the Americans she worked with, including prominent members of the NRA, and her boyfriend, Paul Erickson, 56, a longtime Republican operative who ran Patrick J. Buchanan's 1992 presidential campaign, and who now faces accusations of fraud in 3 states. Officials have said federal investigators are examining what Mr. Erickson and others who helped Ms. Butina knew about her links to the Russian government. That's interesting. Wasn't Pat Buchanan's 92 presidential campaign very much about isolationism too? So this guy's come a long way from when Buchanan said we shouldn't involve others and America should be for Americans in 92. Has Paul Erickson. Ms. Butina agreed to cooperate with the investigators as part of her deal. In exchange, she will most likely get a short prison term, or possibly be released after having already spent 5 months in jail. She will probably then be deported, according to court papers laying out the agreement. Yet, even as prosecutors secured Ms. Butina's conviction and cooperation, they faced questions about their initial portrayal of Ms. Butina as something like a character out of Red Sparrow, the spy thriller about a Russian femme fatale. I sometimes think they produce those things to just go in concert and give Americans a narrative, right? Prosecutors had already been forced to back off the most salacious accusations against Ms. Butina, that she used sex as spycraft, and acknowledged in court filings this week that she genuinely wanted a graduate degree and was not simply posing as a student to live in the United States. They also dropped accusations of her being in contact with Russian intelligence agencies and that she was only using Mr. Erickson to gain access to other influential Americans. Ms. Butina's lawyers had strenuously objected to the earlier portrayal of their client, and the plea deal was likely to provide her defenders with new fodder to argue that her activities look sinister, only to those who see the world through the outdated lens of the Cold War. For all of the headline-grabbing talk of a flame-haired Russian spy seducing unwitting Americans that followed her arrest, they say, Ms. Butina hardly lived her life in the shadows. She openly advocated Russia-friendly policies and closer connections between her homeland and the United States in speeches, and during her time at American University in Washington, where she earned a master's degree. Her cell phone case featured a picture of President Vladimir V. Putin of Russia riding a horse shirtless. She frequented Russia House, an upscale Washington bar where Russian hockey stars, like Alexander Ovechkin of the Washington Capitals, enjoy vodka and caviar. Ms. Butina similarly made little effort to hide her knack for getting close to powerful older men. She posed for pictures with prominent Republicans, including Governor Scott Walker of Wisconsin and other former presidential candidates. She even managed to get a photo with Donald Trump Jr., the president's eldest son, whom she met at a 2016 dinner hosted by the NRA in Louisville, Kentucky. She also made no secret of her desire to help broker a secret meeting with Donald J. Trump, then a candidate, and Mr. Putin during the 2016 election. Ms. Butina's arrest in July stemmed from what officials described as a broader counterintelligence investigation by the Justice Department and the FBI that predated the 2016 election and is separate from the work being done by the special counsel, Robert S. Mueller III. The investigation has focused on Alexander P. Torshin, a Russian government official who worked closely with Ms. Butina for 4 years. Mr. Torshin is close to Christian conservatives in Russia and has been attending NRA conventions in the United States since 2011. Beginning in 2015, prosecutors said in the plea deal, Ms. Butina agreed and conspired, that's a quote, with Mr. Torshin and Mr. Erickson, identified in court papers as, quote, the Russian official and U.S. person 1, to infiltrate the Republican Party and the NRA and to promote Russia-friendly policies on behalf of the Kremlin. Mr. Torshin directed Ms. Butina's work, they said, and Mr. Erickson helped her with what she called her diplomacy project. They helped her organize trips to Moscow for prominent NRA members and helped her set up meetings for a Russian delegation to the National Prayer Breakfast in 2017. That prayer breakfast we discussed that was started only in 1953. It was the first religious thing to be at the White House after a secular America was called for in the First Amendment. 1950s they did that. But anyway, she set up meetings for the Russian delegation to be at the National Prayer Breakfast in 2017. Quote, throughout the conspiracy, Butina wrote notes to Russian officials about her efforts and her assessment of the political landscape in the United States in advance of the 2016 election, the prosecutors wrote. Continuing, Butina also sought Russian officials' advance on whether to take meetings with certain people. She asked him for direction on whether the Russian government was ready to meet with some of those people. Close quote. The plea deal also makes reference to George O'Neill Jr., a Rockefeller relative and conservative writer who helped pay Ms. Butina's bills in the United States. Mr. O'Neill, who is not accused of wrongdoing, is described in the court papers as, quote, a wealthy and well-connected U.S. person, close quote, who hosted large, quote, friendship dinners that were focused on improving relations between Russia and the United States. The dinners, prosecutors said, afforded Ms. Butina chances, quote, to meet individuals with political capital, learn their thoughts and inclinations toward Russia, gauge their responses to her, and adjust her pitch accordingly, close quote. Then there was a Russian oligarch, Konstantin Y. Nikolaev, who provided money for some of Ms. Butina's initial travel and work in the United States, prosecutors said. Mr. Nikolaev is a transport magnate whose wife runs a Russian gun company that Ms. Butina visited with an NRA delegation in 2015. He has previously denied providing Ms. Butina with any financial support after 2014. That's the piece in the New York Times moments ago by Matthew Rosenberg. You can follow him on Twitter at allmattnyt. That's Matt with two T's. All MATTNYT. This is the anticlimactic non-show, and I've been reading for half an hour straight because all this stuff just broke. So what I'm going to do is stop the show and restart the show and send this material up. Please stay tuned to the anticlimactic non-show. Wait, it's not a great. Why are you asking them to stay tuned? They're not. There's nobody even. I know, but that's not even the point, is it?